Hello, and welcome to the Introverted Manager. Today we'll be discussing my favorite topic, Power BI, and how to predict the future with linear regression. Let's dive right in. Let's take a second and talk about what linear regression is and where does it apply. It's usually used for business forecasting. It can be used to predict future sales, inventory requirements, or consumer trends based on historical data. Although there are some limitations. If your data has some seasonality or outliers, you should probably explore other techniques. Linear regression will be affected significantly by the outliers, and therefore you should probably not rely on what it shows you. There are two variables, x and y, independent one and dependent one. Let's say in our case, we have x-axis, which is time series data, and we have y variable, which changes with time. Let's say you have multiple data points on your graph. What linear regression line will be is the best fitting straight line through your data points on the graph. This line is mathematically calculated to minimize the distance between those data points, and your slope is an angle of that line. If your y variable grows, your slope will be angle will be positive. If it's the other case, it will be negative. Okay, let's see what we'll be working with today. You might be familiar with this report already because I showed it multiple times in weekly review videos. This is the report where I'm tracking my expenses and how I'm doing in terms of the budget. As you might remember, I have specific budget for a year, which is 20K, and I would like to be on top of that and see how I'm burning it and whether I am on track or I need to cut my expenses. There are three lines on this visual. The gray one is baseline burn down. The dark blue one is my actual burn. And there is a new one, which is purplish color, which is linear regression based on my running burn down. Let's see what it shows if I unzoom. So the gray line is baseline and the purplish line shows that, well, I guess good news for me. It shows that by the end of the year, I might end up with 1,000 surplus. Okay, let's go through data model. There are just two tables. Day table, which is quite standard for Power BI models, and expenses and income. That's the table where I store my transactions. Let's see. This is how the data looks like. The important column for us is running burn down. That's the one that I would like to predict and to see if I keep my current expense rate, where I will end up at the end of the year. Will I go into minus or will I have something to spend? If you would like to see how running burn down is calculated, give me a second, I will show you. It's calculated using M code, and give it a second to load. Let me open Advanced Editor to show you all of the steps. You can pause if you want to because I commented all of the code. So if you would like to read it after, you can screenshot it or pause it for a second and go through it. But basically what it does is it adds index column and then iterates through each column using that index. Here's my starting budget, which is 20K, and then it sums up all of the expenses that I have in amount column. Because those expenses have minus sign in front of it, it's actually, instead of summarizing, it actually subtracts those expenses from 20,000 starting budget, and it iterates through each row. And at the end, It removes index column because it's no longer necessary after the calculation and I have no use for it. Again, you can pause and read through it if you would like more details. It's not the topic of today's video. Let's go back to the report. Now that we know how run-in burn-down works, let's see how to calculate linear regression. Actually, it became way easier, I believe last year, when Microsoft added new functions specifically for that, to calculate linear regression. Before, it was possible, but with some workarounds. Now you can actually use inbuilt function into DAX language. The thing here is that this function uses non-standard syntax. Basically, you will not see code suggestions in case of this function because it's non-standard. And I will link in description to the article which goes into more detail how this function works. But basically what happens, instead of outputting the line, it actually outputs the table. And then from this table, we need to extract some values that we are using for calculation. By default, it won't work. So let's walk through the DAX measure and see how it works. So there is a variable called line, which is our line. So remember from the explanation that I did, here is our function that Microsoft implemented, which calculates linear regression, line_x. It goes through all of the records and removes all of the filters from expenses and income table and goes through all of them. Our dependent variable, as we discussed already, is run-in burn-down. And independent variable, or our time series, is a date field. Now the slope, which is an angle of that line, is one of the fields which is output of that line_x function. Therefore, we need to extract it, and that is part of non-standard syntax. So we're selecting column from that variable, which is called slope1. As you can see, it's underlined with red because by default that syntax shouldn't work, but just in this case, it does. The same happens with intercept. We're extracting one of the fields. Intercept is our starting line. Our x is our date, as I mentioned already, our independent variable or time series. And last variable is y, which is calculated this way. And then we're returning y as a result of this DAX measure. And let's see. This is how easy it is to make linear regression in Power BI. One more thing I wanted to discuss with you is to actually show you how linear regression reacts to outliers. I mentioned that point in the beginning of the video that linear regression actually not very good for outliers. Let's see how it works in practice. So basically, I will remove one of the filters that I have for my data because currently all of the data in this table is filtered up until today. I have few records in the table that are in the future. The expenses that I know already or income that I know already will come on certain date. So if I remove that filter and let me copy this line somewhere, because I would like to have it back once we finish here. So I will copy whole M code and remove that latest filter so we have all of the records, and load data back into the model. Let's wait a bit, it's loaded, and now let's see what happened to linear regression. Come on. Okay, here's outlier. I will receive, to give you some details, I will receive some refund for utilities that I paid in 2023. And of course I marked it as an income. But what happens is, because it's an outlier and it might not happen ever again, or might happen, no one knows, but because linear regression doesn't react well to outliers, now we see that it shows probably that won't happen, and that by the end of the year I will end up with 5,000 surplus. That's the result of outliers in your data. If you have something similar, you probably shouldn't rely on those results. And I will not be relying on those results. So maybe what should happen is that in my calculation, I should filter out those outliers. That's all for today. In the next video, I will show you how to make app-like buttons in Power BI to make your reports more interactive. Subscribe and see you in the next one.